If you're enjoying the Health Geeks Book Club podcast, we'd appreciate if you hit the subscribe button, leave a like, rating, or review, whichever your preferred podcatcher platform allows.
This episode is sponsored by Well Balanced Nutrition and 360 Health.
Welcome to the Health Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
Good morning, Kristen Norton and our guest Cyrus Bush and, of course, Timothy Beeman, the Podfather. Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hello.
We are the Health Geeks, and we're a book club, and I'm telling you, this is going to be a geeky discussion today. What you think, guys?
Sure is.
Yes, in all manner of ways.
Yeah, I'm not so sure there are many in the world that would get as geeky on this as we are, but I'm so happy that you all are reading with me.
Mm-hmm. It's a good one.
Okay, so we have picked a book called The Genie in Your Genes on the recommendation of our fellow health geek, Cyrus Bush.
Yes.
And this is about epigenetic medicine, and not so many of us have a lot of familiarity with epigenetics. But before we get into the details, because this was an award-winning book, and it was published in 2014 by a press called the Energy Psychology Press. Y'all familiar with that press? No,
Well, I've seen that.
Okay, you have, because you read more
Because I read it.
Yeah, okay. The author is a fellow named Dawson Church, PhD. Well, me being the academic, I go, okay, where did he get that? Where did that come from? So I did a little research on Dawson Church, and it was very, very interesting. He has a most unusual educational journey. He has what he calls his graduate and undergraduate studies from Baylor University,
Texas.
one of our American universities. Then I dug into that a little bit, and he actually has a degree in communications, a BA degree. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the things that shows up in this book. He's a very effective communicator. Then he has a doctorate from the Integrative Health Care at Holos University. Have you ever heard of Holos University?
Definitely not.
No.
No, me neither.
Not this week.
No? Yeah, well, guess what, guys? It is the only university in Russia, Moscow, that offers English-taught, internationally recognized degree programs in creative industries.
Wow.
Now, creative industries, what are those? Well, that would be film, music, architecture, education.
Podcast.
Yeah, maybe. Well, you need to go find out. It was founded, this Holos University, in 2003. And this Dawson guy, Church, gets his degree in 2006. So this is a brand new university, and it's an international association of some very interesting other schools. But it seems like it's an online thing. Interactive distance learning, which also is a new way to be credentialed in the world of credentialing, right? Mm-hmm. We didn't used to have the ability to study with people internationally.
Yeah.
So I don't know how long this program took, but anyway, he also has a PhD in natural medicine, okay, and that's interesting.
Right.
Other kinds of medical degrees are in allopathic medicine, chiropractic medicine, so on and so forth. Well, anyway, my point being, this is a fellow who has a lot of visibility if you go online because he co-founded, or he did found, the National Institute for Integrative Health Care, and that's NIIH. So, that's kind of cute, too, because our National Institute of Health, which is one of our governmental bodies of substantial, credible resources, right?
Right. It's NIH.
NIH, and here we have the NIIH, so I thought that was pretty good. And he also has the EFT universe. Now, Cyrus, what is the EFT universe? Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
EFT universe is
Emotional Freedom Technique.
Emotional Freedom Techniques is the acronym.
Is that EFT?
EFT, yeah. And he established the EFT universe quite a while ago. Mm-hmm. They credential people. They do workshops. That's the first time I ever heard about Dawson Church was through a friend who introduced me to EFT, and she had studied with Dawson. Mm-hmm. And EFT universe is just a wonderful collection of practitioners, resources, studies that have been done to validate.
I would say it's one of the most substantial alternative medical resources on the web.
It is one of the best.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so this guy has been very industrious. So,
And he still is.
yeah, all right. And the table of contents is very in-depth. He really teases his book down into little chunks so that if you have an interest in something, you can find it pretty quickly. As I said, it's very readable. He has a index, which I always love books with indexes because then you can go find what you were thinking about or want to reference again, because this is definitely a thought-provoking book. So that's a good thing. And he's got a very in-depth bibliography that we would call endnotes. However, when I dug into the endnotes, I was a little disappointed because many of his references are the New York Times. They're not the original works, or they're books or compilations of ideas. And I think that's probably appropriate because without the underpinnings of a rigorous scientific education, I think he's looking at people who distilled that down and explained that to the general public and has used that body of work, which is kind of what his book is. He's distilling down some of these ideas. So my caution as we get into this from my perspective, and I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say, is reservation. I think there's good reason for reservation on some of his conversation. Okay, I'm going to be quiet.
No, I appreciate that introduction and that take on it because I was like, what is Eleanor going to say about this? But it was clear to me that Dawson Church was really determined to make EFT, emotional freedom technique, an evidence-based practice. So that kind of became apparent. And it's funny that you said it's easy to read. This is a big book. And,
Who said it's easy to read?
quite daunting to me, the type of reader that I am. And especially in the middle, it got really in the weeds for me. And I found that part of it kept repeating itself, or it seemed that way to me. And I'm like, this could really stand to be a little more succinct.
Yeah, but I think in an educational context, repetition is a way to kind of bring your audience to, this is a critical thing I'm saying, and I'm going to repeat it.
Yeah.
But I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, but that was just my take on it.
Oh, dear. I'm not used to this strategy here.
Oh, well, you go ahead, and then I've got something else to say, too.
But I didn't really.
Yeah, because this may help you.
Okay.
There's a quote in here, and we have run into this in other books, and I always get to this point and go, yes. The history of medicine provides us with many such cautionary reminders, because I said caution, right? Of how hostile skeptics, me, more interested in reinforcing their prejudices than in healing, can slow the adoption of therapies with a robust base of evidence and delay the day when their benefits are available to suffering patients. We've read about breath techniques, remember the book on breath? And how there's that history in there. People came up with this idea, if we teach people how to breathe properly, and it's taken years. We still don't have that as a recommendation often, unless you get into the alternative therapies. And so even though I'm saying caution, I think what I'm saying is caution on the way he validates his ideas, but honestly, I think if you practiced his ideas, what's it going to hurt?
I like that because that's what I kept thinking. You know, the references were too many for me to go back and be like, was this really a good research study to be quoting or whatever? So, but I felt like, you know what, though, if you tried this, what's it going to hurt? It's only going to benefit you possibly. So, yeah, I felt the same exact way.
I like the fact that he not only pointed out EFT, but he pointed out other different modalities, energy medicine, Donna Eden, the weed, different techniques where you can hold acupressure points and think about a problem. So I appreciated that about his approach.
Well, Cyrus, you have I think it's okay for me to share this, a faith base. I mean, you've spent time as a pastoral care and,
right.
and director, minister of music and those kinds of things.
Correct, yeah.
So this is a book about faith and biology. And I think you mentioned, before we got on the air, Bruce Lipton, because Bruce Lipton is another author who has written about the biology of belief.
Right.
And he writes a wonderful endorsement for the Genie in Your Genes, which is the book that we're talking about. And I think faith, when I was teaching science, science is a discipline. There's certain ways you think about science. You use scientific method, all this kind of thing. And so the evidence base comes out of that methodology. Faith is a totally different, and belief is a totally different thing. And so what we're talking about in these books is, does your emotion, does your belief affect your biology? And that's the fun discussion we're going to have, I think.
Yeah.
Have you something put to that?
Well, no, I think from the research that I've read and the observations I've made, faith does play a big part in the effectiveness of healing and the effectiveness of using EFT. If someone doesn't believe this is going to work, it makes it harder for it to have an impact on them. That's just what I've seemed to observe.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to teach some geriatrics, geriatric medicine, and in that, it was back in the, I guess, early 90s, and there's a fellow over at Duke named Harold Koenig who now has a position called the Director for the Center of Spirituality, Theology, and Health. Howard Benson up at Harvard, I believe, was the first mind-body medical doctor. He started that whole movement with the relaxation response.
Yeah.
So there are people who come out of this heavy science background and are moving into this realm of conversation that's integrating physics, biology, emotion, theology, philosophy, and saying there's something here. And I know in other books we've read, they talk about the investment in research. All the big monies are going into pharmaceutical research for healing modalities. Very little is going into nutrition research, this energy medicine, and saying let's boost up the. So I feel better as a scientist and a skeptic. There's evidence that this stuff is real, although we know it's real.
We do.
Yeah, we know it.
Well, let's get into why it was called Genie in Your Genes.
Okay.
So he starts off saying that it was a theory for the longest time that our genes determine all of our characteristics, right? We know that our genes, once we have them, they do not change, right?
Yeah, and that was Watson and Crick,
Yeah.
Nobel Prize
Yeah.
winners. And, sidebar there, y'all know who Rosalind Franklin is? She's the one that should have gotten the Nobel Prize.
Of course.
Oh.
This is the feminist scientist in me.
Love it.
She was in that team of people and was a crystallographer and had been working with another prominent scientist, and they kind of had a difficult relationship, so it sort of slowed their progress. But in the late of the night, she took a picture of DNA, and it explained the double helix. But she hadn't gone into that interpretation yet. But these two other guys, Watson and Crick, somehow surreptitiously get their hands on her photograph without her permission, and then take it and move forward. And she is not credited until less than the last 10 years. I think they finally decided that she was central in this whole new genetic movement. As explaining the genes and the chromosome were huge. So what is a gene? Because Cyrus, I
was asking you about that.
Yeah.
Yes, please tell us again.
Yes, let's see I don't know if I can do it. We know that
The DNA
a strand of DNA is made up of nucleotides. Those are the building blocks. Hang on there, audience. I'm going into the weeds. And they have these little letters, A, T, C, G, and they mean the kind of chemical they are. But they assemble themselves in a strand that is maybe could circle the world a few times, but yet it lives in our nucleus. So it's a very, very small thing. Kind of blows your mind to think about it. But the way these nucleotides are sequenced is what we call the genetic code. And then there are segments of that code that, interestingly enough, allow another molecule, an RNA, to come in and transcribe that code and take that transcribed code to another place in the nucleus and build a protein. So some of they have thought there's junk segments that don't do anything except separate these meaningful segments called genes. And then there was a guy named Craig Ventnor who came along and coded the human genome. And then with that coding of the human genome, he actually did he could tell which genes came from his father and which ones came from his mother. And then you can then say, do I have the protein that allows me to decompose alcohol? You know, do I have the protein that will allow me to digest, something? I mean, there's just proteins are structural and functional. Some of them are hormones, act like hormones. Some of them are the cell building blocks. But you have to have a code. All right, so we have a code, and it says, I have blue eyes.
And we used to think that code was there and nothing else could impact.
Yeah, if your dad died of cardiovascular disease, you got a risk factor for it. It's in your genes, so you're going to have it too.
And then
you're going to have diabetes. You're going to have diabetes.
Right.
You're going to have anxiety
It was
disorder.
in stone. If you had it was in stone. Yeah.
And then epigenetics came in, the study of the signals that tell our genes what to do
turn
and
on.
when to do it.
So on top of the gene,
Yeah.
epi means on top. So there's something that's activating or repressing the expression of those genes. And so there's a protein sheath around the DNA, which is really important because that long strand could get damaged, so it condenses and these histone proteins allow the DNA strand to be wound up really tightly, and then we can see it on a visual microscope. So we can take pictures of them, look at them in the condensed form. We can watch them divide, separate, do all sorts of things. It's fascinating. But when they're being encoded or read, they unwind. So there's a. Were you going to get to the epigenetic theory of health chart that he comes up with?
Nope, go for it.
Let's
While
see.
you look for it, I'm going to share
Yes.
his good analogy
I like this picture right there.
between genome and the epigenome. Is that how I say it?
Yes.
So your genome is like a hardware on a computer, right? You might have Microsoft Word installed on that hard drive, even when your computer's turned off.
Oh, yeah?
Then you have to boot up that computer and click on the Word icon to open and activate the program. And that is the software that defines how the hardware is used. That's the epigenome. Does that make sense? So it's on your hard drive, but it might not be turned on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it takes action and a signal to turn it on.
And so one of those things is methylation or deacetylation, which are really heavy terms. But what happens is you're reducing the positive charges and adding positive charges. So this gets down to a really subatomic level, when you're looking at charges, because those are electrons and protons and things like that. But if you're methylating and deacetylating your histones, you're repressing the transcription. And when you acetylate the histone, it removes that positive charge and it upregulates transcription. So it's like lock and key. You turn it on, off, on and off. So what are the things that cause it to
what
turn
turns it on and what turns it off? That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, and on page 76 of his book, he has a chart of what he calls the epigenetic health cycle, where you have internal epigenetic interventions and you have external environmental influences. So me as an environmentalist have been very concerned about toxic exposures of cleaning products or the volatile organic compounds that are floating around, or the too many x-rays that people get, or drinking lead water like they are down in Camp Lejeune. We've got some contaminated groundwater, Flint, Michigan, those kinds of things. Those can affect your genes, the expression of them.
Right.
But what this book, I think, is really focusing on is these internal epigenetic factors.
It says that every feeling and thought, in every instant, you are performing epigenetic engineering on your own cells,
Yeah, yeah.
your feelings and your thoughts.
So what follows, he has several stories, experiments, and studies that help drive home his idea that our thoughts, beliefs, intentions all have an impact on our physical bodies. So he starts with diet. When in the 90s, they had overweight mice that were fed a diet rich in methyl groups, and that can inhibit an expression of the gene that was making them overweight and their coat specific color. So then they were able to, the first time, have the offspring of these mice slender and healthy.
Oh, my.
So that demonstrated the effect of maternal diet on offspring
Yeah.
without changing DNA. So that was one thing that, okay, diet can change how things are played out. And then nurture, right? How we're nurtured as babies. They showed this in animals and then had some reports in humans too, that when you had access to your mother to calm you, you end up being less anxious and fearful later on. So they demonstrated that in rats. Mm-hmm. And then the whole adverse childhood experience, we
bump into all the time.
Talked about this in episode 81 with what happened to you, about traumatic childhood experiences. And he brings this up that, if you have had a lot of those childhood experiences, you're 5 times more likely to be depressed, 3 times more likely to smoke, and 30 times more likely to attempt suicide. So we know how important nurture is for the mental side of the genes that get turned on. And then the beliefs, that's what, kind of circling back to you guys were talking about, how a lot of this book was about beliefs impacting your physical body. And there are some mind-blowing stories in here and research. Do you guys have any to share?
While you're looking for the specifics, I wanted to add, my comment about Dr. Koenig over at Duke University. He went on and looked into religion, not just belief. Like, I believe I'm a happy person.
Yeah.
But I have a theology, whether it's Islamic or Judaism or Christianity. I mean, he has he's lectured everywhere in all sorts of cultures and done research. And there's this consistent thing about people who have a belief system and practice it have better outcomes.
And I wish
a higher quality life.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah,
Maybe,
and I wanna
maybe
share
not
Dr.
longer, but a higher
Ironson.
quality. Yeah.
Dr. Ironson, her research stood out to me in this book. So she studied HIV patients over a 4-year period, and she would measure things like their viral load and the helper T cells, which was, the good cells that kill the invading organisms.
Refer to our book review on immune.
Yes. What she found is that those who believed in a punishing, judgmental God had a helper T cell decline more than twice the rate of those who don't see God as judgmental. That was interesting.
That's significant.
And their viral load increased, so the infection in their blood increased more than 3 times faster. And in her studies, this belief was a stronger predictor of disease progression than depression, which is huge. And then so on the flip side of that, Dr. Ironson says, if you believe God loves you, it's an enormously protective factor, even more protective than scoring low for depression or high for optimism. So,
Don't you love it? And we all knew this, right?
He talked about
but he says that so many of us believe in a judgmental God. So I don't know. God loves you guys. If you don't believe that, it's true.
It would be maybe a healthy belief to have.
That's right.
Well, I believe it. Which, it's hard-fought battle because a lot of people grow up in ultra-conservative fundamentalists who preach a judgmental, angry, punishing God. And so if you grow up with that, it's a hard concept and image to change and to break.
Sort of like the Taliban.
What is that?
I don't know, but I understand they're pretty conservative and fundamental and judgmental.
Yeah, and
and restrictive
But it's something that it's not easily changed or broken. But once you do, I mean, if you can just take a deep breath and realize, maybe everything that happens is not God punishing me. Maybe gravity is there all along, and if I do this, I'm going to fall and I'm going to bust my head. And so that's a wonderful thing to point out, that the belief in God. He was talking about some guy who was having such difficulty, and that he talked with the doctor for a period of while, and the doctor wrote him a prescription, said, you need to talk 2 or 3 times a week to your rabbi, your priest.
Yeah.
And that
turned the table.
Turned the table for him.
His health.
Yeah, so that, religion and belief and the health system, it doesn't seem to go together. But I'm going to kind of wrap this up saying that what section in his book, 7 Minutes of Spirituality, A psychologist at Indiana State University reported that when doctors spent time talking with critically ill cancer patients about their spiritual concerns, 3 weeks later, they reported a better quality of life and less incidence of depression. And that was just with an average time of 5 to 7 minutes spent with their doctor about spirituality.
So let's wrap this up because we want to keep talking about this. And I think we need another podcast. What do you guys think?
Maybe one or two more. I don't
Okay,
know.
all right.
Yeah, we
all
can
right.
keep going.
All right. So we're going to take a break and we'll come back in the next episode. Thank you, Cyrus, for being with us
You're welcome.
today.
Thank
Do
you
you
for
want to
the
tell us
invitation.
what you do?
Well, I am a coach, mentor, EFT practitioner, and trainer, and I help people deal with stress and anxiety.
And are you geographically restricted?
No, I'm not.
There
I
you
can
go.
work
So if
with
you're out
anyone,
there listening,
anywhere in the world,
we can get you in touch with Cyrus.
That's right.
And I'm Eleanor Russell at 360 Health, making healthy happen. My brand partner is Shackley Corporation, and we have a mission to bring true net wellness to the world. So if you are interested in that, go to my website, 360health, number 4, letter U.com.
And I'm Kristen Norton, one of the 3 registered dietitians at Well Balanced Nutrition, where we help you have healthy habits around nutrition and behavior change. Give us a call or visit our website at www.wellbalancednutrition.com. Thanks for listening to this episode about genes and a little bit about faith. And we have so much more to talk about, so stay tuned.
The views and opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.